Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap Surveys and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at adding routing to your questionnaires and forms, helping you gain the data you need from your project. It should take about 30 minutes and as ever there's plenty of further resources available which I'll be pointing you to at the end. We'll begin by looking at the three types of routing available in Snap XMP online, discussing when one might be used over the other. We'll look at adding some simple routing to an existing questionnaire before moving on to some more elaborate examples which will hopefully give you some ideas for how your questionnaires and forms might be designed. I should add at this stage you might be more familiar with the term skip logic or survey branching, but it's all the same thing. And for anyone who's listening in from Australia, apologies for any offence caused, as I'm pretty sure that routing means something completely different on that side of the world. A few key benefits to making use of routing. More than anything, it's a way of guiding a participant from start to finish, avoiding them going off on a tangent. In doing so, you can personalise the experience for them based upon their answers given. Because they are being guided, you will avoid them having to answer unnecessary questions, making the process that much quicker for them. With that, there's less annoyance and frustration at answering questions which don't seem relevant for them, and that's going to lead to them being more likely to get to the end of the survey and actually pressing submit, which means more data heading your way. And if you haven't annoyed them too much and you're lucky, you may well find that they're willing to participate again in the future. Another potential benefit, depending upon your project, will be the end data pot. Often when looking at existing client surveys, I've come across multiple versions of a survey where a survey's been cloned and then tweaked as they need the different versions to be relevant for different participants. This then means that a master survey has to be created to enable that data to be analysed together. By having it as one larger routed survey, the analysis stage gets that little bit easier. It also means that you're dealing with one link for the questionnaire or form rather than multiple links for different forms. It may well be that you do end up producing a number of different seeded links that are based upon the original link. That way you take the participant down the correct route without having to ask them to decide which route they're going to go. So again, making the end product more efficient and also less prone to mistakes as you're deciding which route they're going to go. Okay, let's take you into the software and look at how routing can be used to enhance your data collection. I'm going to start by opening up a very simple survey which has three main questions. Based upon the response to these three questions, I'll be able to show you the three different types of routing. So if I click on the first question and on the accordion on the left, we have the routing icon and we have the three different types of routing available here. I should add that depending on what type of question you clicked on, depends on which options will be available. So if I was to click back on the title at the top, you can see I've got two options available and they're all about this question. Whilst if I come back down to the question we're looking at, which is question 3, we then have an additional option which is all about the answer choices. So let's have a look at the three main types of routing. So ask this question if. So here we're specifying when a question will pop up or appear. A simple example might be a question around smoking. It could be set to appear if the participant had previously stated that they are over the age of 11. Next we have after this choice go to. Here we're saying that based upon the response to a set of potential answer choices, the participant will then be directed to the next relevant part of the form. So at its simplest, if they say yes, go to Q2. If they say no, go to Q3. And then finally we have after this question go to. There may be questions where it really doesn't matter how the respondent has been answering the question. Regardless of whether they've answered A, B, C or D, the next relevant question is X. This type of routing just means that you don't have to put routing on each of the different answers, you just apply it to the entire question. So let's put this into action. Now, just to make it a bit more realistic, I have got two questions at the beginning, followed by a page break. But it's these next three questions, questions 3, 4 and 5, that we're going to be focusing on today. For question number 3, okay, and clicked on the question and I've got the options on the left, we're going to specify that if they say yes, we're going to send them off to question 4, and if they say no, we're going to send them off to question 5. So we're going to make use of after this choice go to. But before we do that, I'm going to pop into the paper edition of the survey. I'll just come back down to question number 3 again. Now, the reason for doing this in the paper edition is that the routing tends to be hidden by default in the online editions, as you don't really need to tell them what to do because the browser or the form will actually be jumping around for them. Whereas in the paper edition, it is going to be invisible because obviously we need to tell them where to go. So viewing your routing in the paper edition just makes it easier to see what has and hasn't been set up. But just to confirm, routing is functionality rather than formatting, and as such, it really doesn't matter which edition it is that we're in when we set that routing up. So sticking with question 3, and as I said, we've already selected routing on the left-hand side, and we're going to choose after this choice, go to. And if they say yes, we're going to send them off to question 4. If they say no, we'll send them off to question 5. I mentioned about whether the routing will be visible or not. You can see, if I go back into the routing, that we have got paper only at the top. So that's the default setting. We could always show it or never show it, but generally you'd have it on display for the paper edition and off for the online editions. And you can see we've got it on display here. The text will appear in the printed out paper version, whilst the small icon will disappear. Looking at question 4. So this is going to be asked of anyone who said that they were in education, so anyone that said yes to question 3. From an analysis perspective, knowing which school group each person's in is going to be very important. From a questionnaire flow perspective, I really don't care. As long as they've answered this question, or even just that they've seen this question, the next relevant question will then be question number 6. So rather than saying if they click preschool, go to question 6, and if they click infant school, go to question 6, and then the same for junior and senior school, it's much quicker just to say after this question, go to question 6. We're going to make use of a different type of routing this time. And as before, just dropping down the menu, and we're going to send them off to Q6. The third and final bit of routing will be applied to question 5. And here we're going to specify when a particular question is asked. So ask this question if. Now I said it's going to be applied to question 5. It's actually going to be applied to question 5a, which is the please specify. And we want that to appear if they tick other. So if I go into ask this question if, we're not jumping forward, so there's no drop down menu available. We're instead making use of an expression and saying when it will apply to. And as I said, there is question 5, which is the tick box selection box, and then question 5a, which is the open-ended box. We're applying that routing just to the open-ended box, and we're going to specify that question 5a will pop up if the response to question 5 was other, but we actually use the position in the list, so it's option number 5. Okay, so we've added some simple routing to the questionnaire. I mentioned about doing this in the paper edition rather than the online editions. If I do pop back into the online edition now, one of them at least, and come back down to the questions, you can see the routing isn't visible on screen. It is visible on the left-hand side, so we can see what's going on, but it's obviously a lot easier to see what's happening in the paper copy. So let's have a look and see what's going on in a live preview. So I'll save what we've done. Go into collect, and we just publish those changes. And I'll just launch the live preview. As I said, I had a couple of sort of questions just to begin with. We'll just work our way through those. So for question number 1, or question number 3 in fact, if they click yes, they specify which school they're in, and then they go on to answer the comment question, whilst if they select no, the school question disappears and the employment question pops up. Now, in my example today, the questions are popping up and disappearing in front of our eyes, which, depending upon your subject matter and audience, you may feel works better by perhaps placing page breaks in between some of these questions. I guess more than anything, it's dependent upon whether it's an issue that a participant sees a future question and then it disappears. But certainly from a testing perspective, it's quite handy having it all on one page. So I'll leave it on no. This was a multi-choice question. So when I select other, please specify pops up below. So at its simplest, you can see that routing is just about making sure that participants have access to the questions that they need to see and they skip over content that isn't relevant to them. And to give a real life example, just the other day I was completing a questionnaire. It was actually a form asking me for school and medical records for my son's football academy. It started off asking the age group that he was in, which was split over 3 different questions based on the different age bandings. I proceeded to give school details, only to then be asked a very similar set of questions 2 more times. So I was polite the first time giving all my information. I was somewhat short in my answers the second time, and then by the third time I was downright rude. Now, clearly the survey had been badly designed, and I would assume or hope that they hadn't actually tested it. What was actually happening was that I was completing the school details for my son as if he was in the infants, and then I was going on to complete it as if he was in the juniors, and then finally, which was when I was getting really annoyed, that's when I was being asked about his actual school, which was the senior school. I should add that it was a Google form rather than a snap file or snap form. And whilst mentioning Google Forms, I must also say that other inferior form builders are available. Now, being that I work for a survey software company, I do always take the time to see these online forms through from start to finish, mainly just to see how bad people are at designing things. I do know, however, that from talking to quite a few of the other parents, most of them just got frustrated and ended up giving up halfway through. Anyway, before we move on to look at some more elaborate examples, I just want to show you a relatively new feature that can be used alongside routing, making the questions flow that little bit smoother. So I'm going to move back to the Build tab. And coming back down to question number 5. Now, at the moment, when we were selecting Other, the Please Specify was displaying underneath. If I was to click at the end of Other, I can then make use of something called an inline question. So I'm going to insert a variable field. I'm going to take the question 5a, which is the Please Specify, and I'm going to select that that's going to be an inline question. Now, that just means that this open box will actually appear in line with the tick box. Now, to make it read a little bit more naturally, I'm going to add a colon and a space. And I think this works really well if you've got a number of sort of different further option questions. So I'm actually going to add an extra open-ended question at the end. I'm going to put some text in there. What is the company name? So that's question 6. And again, I'm going to insert that one at the end of the director office holder. Again, taking question 6 and inline question. Just remembering that we'd probably also want to apply some routing to that company name question to only appear if they tick director. So again, clicking on the routing. So we're going to ask this question if the response to question 5 was option number 4. Okay, I'll save that again. And then back into collect, and we'll republish those changes. And again, launch that preview. So again, I'm going to say that we are not in education, so choose different options. When I tick other, the Please Specify is appearing besides rather than below. So it just keeps the attention that you're not having to sort of jump from part of the page to a different part, particularly if your pop-up is in relation to one of the options further up. So yeah, I think this works really well where you have got a number of additional questions, particularly when the sort of Please Specifies are based on some of the answers further up the page. Okay, let's look at some slightly more interesting uses of routing. Okay, move back into Snap Online. Moved back to a different survey, this time looking at one called different logos. mentioned the idea of a survey that contains data relating to different groups of respondents. The advantage being that the data sits in one pot rather than split over multiple surveys. And I've got an example here which is about a conference survey, and it's being used across multiple sites, and each of those sites may want to use their own logos. So we've got the All Good sites, we've got the In-Crowd Conference Centre and the Castle Conference Centre. So 3 different logos, and we want them all to appear, obviously, depending on which person's filling in the survey. So if I click on one of those logos, click on the routing, you can see that the Castle Conference Centre is going to pop up if the response to Q1 equals 3, the In-Crowd if Q1 equals 2, and the All Goods if Q1 equals 1. Now, question 1 is actually a hidden question. So if I go up and show you that hidden question. So this will either be seeded by way of a personalized link that would be emailed to the delegates, either using our own mailing system, or you could use a seeded QR code on posters, or just by giving people the seeded link in the first place. Now, before we view this in action, you notice that I have also got a generic title, which doesn't mention sort of the name of the conference center, and that will appear if the response to Q1 was NR, NR standing for no reply. So that just means if anyone clicks on the link and perhaps it isn't a seeded link, then they will still receive something at the top rather than going straight into the actual questionnaire. So again, I'll save what I've done and go to collect. Just publish those changes. So initially I will click on the sort of non-seeded link. So you can see we've got the generic title, whilst if I was to look at some seeded links, now I have some shortcuts at the top. So I've got All Goods, which I don't know if you can see there, but it says at the end, it says Q1 equals 1 in the link, In-Crowd Q1 equals 2, and Castle Conferences Q1 equals 3. So if I just work my way through the All Goods, you can see All Goods, In-Crowd, and Castle Conferences. So let's have a look at how this was done. Now we do need to be careful when routing people around the questionnaire, allowing for all the different variations of how a person may have found themselves upon your page. So going back to the Build tab, I come down to the thank you message. So for example, I've actually got 2 thank you messages. So one based on if they've entered the prize draw, which is actually based on question 3. And again, if we look at the routing for that one, you can see that will appear if the response to question 3 was effectively yes. And then there's more of a sort of standardized thank you message, which will pop up if they've not entered the prize draw, or again, if they haven't answered question 3. So again, allowing for all the different possibilities, what happens if they don't answer that question, etc. You could do something similar sort of part way through the questionnaire, when you might need to sort of exit them out of the questionnaire. So for example, you may take them off to a thank you message which explains why you've just cut their journey short. So it could be that the rest of the questionnaire is about a specific customer type and they've just mentioned that they don't fall into that category. And that would be different from the way that a screen out would work, as you'd still want them to submit the data and collect all their data that they had given you, rather than screening them out right at the start and not collecting out the data. Now, I'm actually doing something fairly similar at the beginning of this. I've got a number of different introductions. I have a message which is going to be used if question 1 was not seeded. So if someone finds themselves on the survey which wasn't seeded, they're going to get the generic link, whilst if they do have a seeded questionnaire, then they're going to be getting an introduction, which is also going to include some text. And again, that's just been inserted via a variable field. So again, my routing, similar to what we did before. So that will pop up if question 1 was a no reply or an NR. And then we actually made use of this routing earlier when we're going to say it's going to pop up if question 1 has been answered, regardless of how it's been answered. Now, I'm just going to quickly pop back into the PowerPoint just to show you those seeded links. So we have the generic link at the top, And then at the end, we've got the next sort of three are all the seeded ones. So at the end, it starts with a question mark, and then you can see it seeding in Q1 equals 1, Q1 equals 2, Q1 equals 3. Okay, time to ramp things up a little with some very effective routing, which is actually very simple to set up. Back into my surveys, and I've got a live link, which I'm going to view. So here we've got a form which is asking for input on future development needs. So I'll just work my way through the form. The first question is asking me to think of some new features which might be useful to help win new customers. But of course, not everyone's going to have ideas. So I have got the option to effectively say, I don't have any ideas at this stage. So that's for new business. I then have a similar question asking me about existing customers. So again, what features might help existing customers? Again, I can't really think of any at the moment, so I'm going to ignore that one. And instead just give a general comment if I want to. But if we go back and do that one again, this time I'm going to say that I do have some ideas for some new customers. So I'm going to start typing in. So as soon as I start typing in, the option to say I don't have any ideas has disappeared. And as I start typing in more options, more and more options are appearing below. So I've got 2 empty options. I type in pear, I get another 2, and peach. So again, additional options are being added as I start typing answers. I'm then asked to rank those options, so choose from my top 3. If I try and choose a 4th one, it's not going to let me. I then get to find out or to give some options about features that existing customers might like. So I'm just going to add one option in today. Again, the option to say I don't have an idea has disappeared. And this time, because I've only chosen one option, it's not going to ask me to put that in order of top to bottom because there's only one option to choose from. So some nice functional routing, which is ensuring I'm only seeing the bare minimum that I need to see and not being cluttered with irrelevant content. If I open up this survey in Snap, going into the Build tab. So this is actually really simple routing, but we just need to think about it logically and think about the participant journey. So first of all, we have question 1A, B, C, and D all the way down to 1J. And if I click on that one and click on the routing, so this is the ones where the questions would pop up as additional text was input into the survey. So on the side, you can see we've got routing set up on question 1, D, E, F, etc., etc. So question 1D, which is the 4th one, will pop up as soon as data gets typed into question 1B. So as I started typing into the 2nd one, effectively the 4th one popped up. As I started typing into the 3rd one, the 5th one started popping up. So if I head into the routing, it might be a bit easier to see. So question 1, A, B, and C will always appear, but as I said, the additional ones will appear as and when the previous answers get answered, or previous questions get answered. If I come down to question 2, which was the tick box to suggest that I don't have any options at this point. So this one is set to pop up unless question 1A is okay. Or, to reverse that thinking, it will disappear once question 1A has been answered. Now, again, I've actually made use of inline questions and popped that into an instruction, and that just gave me a bit more flexibility in terms of layout, just because this question doesn't really have a question text, so it just allowed me to get rid of some of the extra space that we didn't need. And you can see when they've selected that tick box, after they've chosen that option, it's going to skip over onto N11. So it's going to skip over the ranking question because there's nothing to rank, and ask me to go straight to this section. But going back up to the ranking question, which was question 3A. So first of all, This is taking the data from the first set of questions, so 1A, B, C and D, so again just making use of the insert variable field. And if we look at the routing on the left, so it's actually 3A, B, C, D all the way down to 3J. If we look at 3B onwards, so it's only going to ask me to rank question 1B if they actually put some data in there. So it's not going to be asking me to rank options 4, 5 and 6. I've actually only typed in questions 1A, 1B and 1C. The routing on question 3A though, the first one, is a little bit different. So that will pop up if the response to question 1A was answered and I also answered question 1B. So that's just confirming that there's no point specifying what's going to be in first place if actually you'd only had one option in first place. There's no point ranking a question when there's only one option. And then the rest of the questionnaire is doing a similar sort of thing, but obviously based on slightly different questions. So again, this is based on question 4A, B, C and D rather than question 1A, B, C and D. And likewise, looking at question 4A as opposed to 1A. Okay, just a couple of final examples to show you. First up, a slight variation of a previous example where we were making use of someone needing to input information, but some respondents just having one set of information they need to give, and other respondents having lots of information they need to give. So if I open up my greenhouse residential survey, so previously I made use of the word OK, which then made things pop up when something had been answered. In this example though, I have a quantity response question, and depending on what number's written in there, depends how many times they will be asked to answer information. So if they've only got one member in their household, they're going to be asked for information about that one member. If they've got 3 members, they're going to be asked all 3 questions. There's actually 6 in total. So if I look at that first set of open questions and look at the routing, so these set of questions, questions 2A, B, C, D, etc., will pop up if the response to question 1 was somewhere between 1 and 6, whilst it's only going to ask the information about householder 2 if they've given at least 2 people in response to question 1. So yeah, if they typed in that they've only got 1 person in the household, you don't want to be asking about member 2. So likewise, as I move down, that's 3 to 6 and all the way down to the end. That's only going to pop up if they said they've got at least 6 people. Moving a bit further down, we've got some routing which is a way of drawing out additional information from people, really trying to drill down on specifics. So in my example below, I've got a range of satisfaction type questions, and then just below that, so that's question 8, A, B and C. And then just below that, I've got a couple of additional open-ended questions asking me to be a bit more specific on why some of these results were given. So this section is asking about tidiness, which is based on this question. So if the response to question 8C was options 4 or 5, so 4 and 5 being fairly dissatisfied or very dissatisfied, this additional question will pop up. And then I've done a similar thing based on the overall quality, which is that question there. But this time I've inserted, again, making use of the insert variable field, just to make it even more specific. So that will again only pop up if the response to question 8E was options 4 or 5. So I think this is more likely to give you usable, more specific literal response data, rather than just asking a generic, do you have any further information you wish to give? Another idea, this time to avoid participants having to seek out the dreaded not applicable, is having a sort of filter question before a group of grid questions. So you can see I've got quite a crude example here where we're asking people where the repair was, or which room the repair was done in. It's a multiple response, and then below that we've got the option to say, was the repair fully finished, not fixed, or fixed but not satisfactorily fixed. So it just avoids a respondent having to basically look at maybe up to 6 or 7 options which actually aren't relevant to them, and then having to select not applicable. So again, if we look at the routing for this one, so it's based on question 11. So 12A, the bathroom, will only pop up if they've actually selected bathroom. The bedroom will only pop up if they've selected bedroom. So it also means that when you get to do your analysis, it's nice and clean and you don't have to contend with all the sort of not applicables affecting all your percentages. So we'll finish off by having a look at those last couple of examples in action. So again, I'm going to use one of my links on the favourite bar. So I've got my greenhouse residential. So if I specify that there's just one person in my household, I get one option. If I say 3, I get 3. We've got our satisfaction questions, so I can say that I'm not satisfied for some of these questions, but if I say about the tidiness, I get the additional, please tell me a bit more about why you've said that. And the same for the overall quality. This time I said making use of the additional text. And then finally that filter question. So if I say I was having some work done in the dining room and the kitchen, then I'm asked about the dining room and kitchen. I'm not asked about all the options which weren't relevant. Okay, so hopefully that's provided you with a good introduction to routing, taking you through the very basics of using the 3 types of routing, through to a few nice examples on how you might make your questionnaires and forms more efficient. I'll finish off with a parting thought or two. When setting up your routing, you do need to consider the unusual answers that a respondent might give, making sure you've allowed for all the different pathways a participant might follow. With that, think about the question text and header text that is used in follow-up questions. Does it work if they come from route A, but does it also work if they come from route E? Do we need to perhaps create different messages, or perhaps just make that message more generic? And the best way to do this is to try and get into that mindset of different participants and effectively role play the situation. On screen now are a few QR codes which will take you off to some additional resources, which include some support hub pages for routing in Snap XMP Online. I've also included a webinar I did a little while back based around routing and validation, which builds on the idea of making your forms as effective as possible through a mixture of routing but also validation. And if you have got 2 minutes to complete a short questionnaire about today's webinar, I'd really appreciate that. That can be found using the last QR code on the right, or alternatively, there is a link in the chat of this Teams call. I will be emailing you all these over the next day or so, with also a recording of today's webinar. Just one final thing to say, and that's that I will be running a similar webinar next week, next Tuesday, which will be based around using routing in Snap XMP Desktop. Whilst there will be some overlap in terms of the content, the desktop app does give me the opportunity to showcase a few more advanced examples of routing, which allow me to draw on information gathered via the use of a derived variable. So if you do have Snap XMP Desktop, or you're just curious to see what additional functionality the desktop app can offer, please do join me. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.